Good morning. Today I was going to talk about something called transitional space and explain how transitional space is useful in therapy. So, the concept of transitional space comes from a psychoanalyst named Winnicott. And Winnicott talked about how children use transitional objects like a teddy bear or a blanket, for example, that's somewhere in between themselves and their mother, right? The blanket or the object isn't just any object from the environment. It has a special meaning and a special ability to comfort the child because it's associated with the parent, with the mother, and her function of comforting. But the child also owns it as an object outside of himself. And the child also may project onto this comfort object, right, an ability to comfort him or keep him safe or make him feel good or something like that. So we all use our imagination in such a way. We invest things outside of ourselves with the ability to remind us of functions that other people have met for us, and also to do things for the self, things that it's something that helps us be in a space in between our inner world, our subjectivity, and the external world, right? All the things outside of us, the things we relate to, we engage with, we don't have control over, all those things in the real world, practical things, concrete things, things that have to do with something actually happening in real time is very different from what goes on inside of us in our imagination, in our minds, our hearts, right? Our feelings, thoughts, dreams, creative ideas, things like that, right? Those all go on inside of us. And then we also engage with things outside of us. So a transitional space is a place in between that allows us to um, play around with ideas that come from in us, inside of us, from our subjectivity. Um, and also play around with how those ideas or those things or the things we feel inside might affect us in the outer world or our relationships or how we've been affected by things outside of ourselves without actually making something concrete happen in real life in the external world, right? So if, for example, very angry at my boss and I write a very nasty email saying all my feelings, writing it out may help me in a transitional way to get my feelings on paper, to see my feelings in a concrete way outside of myself, to express what I'm feeling, process it, maybe even come up with another perspective about what happened without actually sending it to my boss and making something in real life happen that may be an undesired consequence, right? Making my boss angry with me or putting my job in jeopardy or feeling guilty for saying something mean, right? So it's transitional in the sense that I'm doing something, I'm writing in a way that is expressing what's inside of me, getting it out in a certain sense, but not getting out in a way that actually creates a consequence or a real-time effect concretely in the external world. Therapy is meant in a lot of ways to offer us the same type of a space, a transitional space. In therapy, we get to play with ideas, we get to express our feelings, we get to try on maybe thoughts or new ways of looking at things, new behaviors, practice, rehearse, right? Um, Process what we feel or what we think or what we may want to do before we actually do it or before making something happen in real life in the external world. And that gives us that space to be able to be safe to not just have our experiences inside of us, but to have a way of getting them out and playing with them and working with them together with the help of somebody else, but also without the pressures that come from worrying about how that's going to, affect things in the actual real world, right? We're not actually doing anything when we're in therapy. We're not changing something. We're not making something happen. We're not um, telling someone outside in our outside lives how we feel about them. We're just talking through something out loud with somebody else who's there to help us in a way that's really transitional. It's in between. It's an in between space. And that makes it safe to express things or put into words things that maybe in the past we weren't able to or weren't aware of or were just holding inside. It gives us a way also to maybe um, play around with doing something different, being something different, what we might lose or gain if we change parts of ourselves, explore parts of ourselves that are maybe like a little fragmented or split off, aren't part of like our general way of being, right? We could maybe explore like a dream or something like that. Things that are a little bit pretend or a little different or just little traces or pieces of a sense of ourselves that's not our usual. All these things are we have an opportunity in therapy to express them, to play around with these ideas, to imagine, to enjoy the process of being able to explore our inner world in a way that's in between doing something about it in the external world or sharing it with someone in the real world. But it's also not just inside of ourselves, right? We're able to actually bounce off ideas with somebody else, talk things through, work things through, and become more fully ourselves, right? That's one of the main points of the transitional space is to help us come alive to parts of ourselves that maybe um, were shut down at some point in life because people rejected us for it, or we felt it wasn't safe to express certain parts of ourselves, or to be spontaneous, or free, or open, or have certain opinions, right? We all get shut down in various ways. And then there's parts of us that don't have a way for self-expression that are sort of like locked up or buried deep inside of us. And we all need a way to try to re-access parts of ourselves to feel more alive or to feel more fully ourselves, right? If we don't embody our full selves, right, we feel a little alienated. There's a part of us that feels disconnected or detached, and we want to re-access those parts of ourselves. It could be also emotions got shut down at a certain point for us, or we develop certain beliefs about ourselves that are not helpful anymore or don't apply anymore. So therapy gives us a space to like play around with all those ideas, to imagine, well, what if I would feel something different? Or I wonder why I feel this way, or where did I learn that? Maybe I can try something different now, right? It gives us a space to play with ideas, to play with our feelings, to play with new ways of looking at things. And the therapist does have to do certain things, right, to make this possible, right? The therapist, first of all, has to give us that space without constantly giving us advice or telling us what to do or directing the conversation, right? The therapist has to create like a holding environment where a person feels, first of all, safe from judgment and understands, right? Sometimes the therapist, like we have to explain to our clients, that this is a space where you're not in the real world, where it is safe to say things that you wouldn't normally say to someone else, where if you have like feelings towards me, transference or projection or something like that, that you normally wouldn't say in a social situation because it would have consequences that might not be helpful or effective, right? You can say those things in therapy, right? Because we're talking through things. We actually want clients to see things that they're not used to normally saying because that means that we're reclaiming lost parts of the self. And this was a big piece of this whole idea of transitional space and Winnicott's ideas, right? Is becoming and becoming alive and being our true selves, our real selves, not the parts of us that we learn to shut down or suppress, right? To accommodate to the external world and the expectations we got from other people and the judgments we felt or rejections that we felt, right? That we learned to sort of bury certain parts of ourselves. We want to re-access those parts of ourselves. And to do that, we have to feel safe. There have to be boundaries that make therapy a separate place, right? Like the same way if you want a child to be able to, I don't know, play freely in the yard, right? And feel completely spontaneous and free and unhindered, there needs to be like a fence around it or a way to keep the child safe, right? So there has to be a boundary around the space in order to make it separate from the rest of a person's life. And there have to be certain boundaries on the part of the therapist, right, that help a person feel like that space is really for them to come into themselves more fully. How this connects to people's symptoms or struggles. So there's different ways of doing therapy, and this is not the approach for everything, right? If someone's like having panic attacks, this might not be the right approach for them at a certain point. They maybe just need help to get over their panic attacks, for example, or their fear of panic attacks. But for people that have more long-standing issues with relationships, with depression, with General anxiety or like waiting for the other shoe to drop or feeling like things are too good to be true and something bad is going to happen when things are going well. Um, if you're not accessing your emotions and then maybe you're just you feel lonely, like you don't have friends because you're not signaling emotional connection with other people, things like that. People have social anxiety, loneliness, right? Having a space where you're really free to be yourself, even if it feels scary at first and awkward. And in the transference, you imagine that the therapist might in some way judge you or reject you or do to you again whatever was done in the past, right? But being brave enough to trust that you have this space, then a lot of times what happens is, first of all, people start to change internally. They feel more free, less inhibited, more relaxed in general, more nurtured and loved and safe. We compartmentalize a lot of our pain into that space because we know we have that space, right? The same way, like if at the end of the day you're going to journal and write your feelings out during the day when you're having feelings, it's containing or helpful to know that later on you're going to have your space and you're going to write it out and you're going to have that place to process things, right? There's something helpful about that. And also, I find that a lot of times as people talk through things, right, new solutions enter their mind or new perspectives. Sometimes I, as a therapist, might offer another perspective, but sometimes clients develop new perspectives just by hearing themselves talk or say things out loud or realizing, how things sound when they talk about them. I just was going to say one more thing and I lost my train of thought. Um, oh, I was also going to say that sometimes what I've noticed with clients is that we talk about a certain issue that they're having, and without understanding exactly how in a linear way, like, oh, I'm getting into arguments with my husband all the time, right? Without us like in an A, B, C, D equals F type of way, right? Like you take one step and another step, you do this without telling the client what to do. They start doing things differently just because they're talking through things and starting to see them differently. The same thing could happen with parenting, right? You might have a certain way that you're behaving with one of your children or a struggle that you're having with one of your children without the therapist telling you, like, do this or do that. Just by talking about it or getting a new perspective about it, you go home a few weeks later, you find yourself just acting differently. You can't help it, right? It's a more of an intuitive or nonlinear process that happens that's not so logical or able to be, we're not able to see exactly like what led to what results, but those results end up happening and it ends up being helpful to people. So I hope this was helpful to you. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to post and I will try to respond. Have a great week.